What up, nerds? Welcome back to The Nerdy Narrative. My name is Leslie Smith, and today on the channel, from New York Times best-selling author Stephen Graham Jones comes a classic slasher story with a twist. Perfect for all horror fans. I Was a Teenage Slasher. This book is outstanding. I'm just going to go ahead and say you don't even need to watch this review if you are a horror fan, most specifically a lover of slasher stories and films. This story is a love story for you, and it is going to change the way you look at slashers henceforth. Promise you that. After I sat down and read the first small chunk of this book, I wrote down in my notes that Stephen Graham Jones had written the perfect summer slasher. As I continued to make my way through the novel, and by the end, I knew it was not just the perfect summer slasher, but the perfect slasher. Before I get deep off into discussing my thoughts and opinions of this book, I do want to give a huge shout out to Saga Press, an imprint of Simon & Schuster, for granting my begging request for a copy of the ARC so that I could read it and review it. Have this out on release day, so any of you that might be on the fence about this one, especially for those of you who read the Indian Lake trilogy, you might be thinking, okay, that was one big epic slasher story. What could he possibly have left in his bag of tricks? Didn't he exhaust everything in that story? No, absolutely not. Friends, do not sleep on this book. This is the book that has finally dethroned The Only Good Indians as my favorite Stephen Graham's book of all time. And I have read several. I have a pretty good collection of Stephen Graham Jones books going. I have just about every type of copy of The Only Good Indians that is available. And now it looks like I'm going to be going down that rabbit hole with this book. This is just one of those books that every time you're in a bookstore and you see it, you're going to want to buy it. Like, that's the kind of book this is. Before I dip off into the guts of this book, talking about the book description and things of that nature, let's talk about the cover. So I have here, this is the ARC, but it's the cover for the US version. I actually really love the UK version way more. In my opinion, the UK cover design does a much better job of showing the modern horror look, while the US version stays true to the classic slasher from the late 80s and early 90s from which this story is set. So let's get into that a little bit more. I Was a Teenage Slasher takes place in 1989 in La Mesa, Texas. La Mesa is a small town in West Texas that is driven by oil and cotton. Everybody knows everybody else's business. Our main character, our narrator for this book, is 17-year-old Tully Driver. He's got a whole lot of potential, but not a whole lot of application, as you would expect from a 17-year-old. He makes this story so unique, so captivating by doing it through the lens of a 17-year-old who has been cursed to become this slasher. Essentially, this is Tully giving us his autobiography. I couldn't help but love this kid. I was rooting for him. He was endearing. He was a normal teenager doing the things that I did as a teenager, listening to the same music. Y'all, this book, if you're my age, mid to late 40s, early 50s, this book is going to take you back in time. Oh my goodness. Get ready to feel all the feels. Stephen Graham Jones really did a great job as far as the nostalgia. You know how they say that you can hear a song and it'll take you back to your time in life when that song was popular or when it meant something to you, and it really puts you back in your memories vividly. I don't know if he did this on purpose with that in mind, but Stephen Graham Jones mentioned a bunch of really popular hair band and metal songs from back in that time frame. It put me back in the 80s and I was loving it. I also think by tying this narrative to those really popular songs, that is going to help readers of this book always remember this book. Like, if anybody else mentions this song, we're going to think about the time in our lives when that song was popular, when we loved it. And on the piggyback of those memories is going to be I Was a Teenage Slasher. And all of the many books that I have read about serial killers and slashers in particular, I don't believe I've ever read one from the perspective before the slasher was the slasher. I remember several where we got the perspective of the killer, but it was during their killing spree, not before it started. Sometimes you get that in a flashback, but because you meet them as a killer first, you never really change your view of them. And I Was a Teenage Slasher, we meet and fall in love with the kid, Tolly, first. It's impossible not to love this kid, not to find him endearing. He's awkward. He's about as graceful as a newborn puppy. He typically says the wrong thing. He's really funny. I just loved his relationship with his best friend, Amber. Just that summer before senior year feeling that he has. He's starting to feel the pressure of needing to figure his life out, what he needs to do, because he realizes he's on the doorstep to adulthood and entering into the real world. At the same time, he manages to not take himself too seriously. He's still just enjoying being a kid. One of the things that I loved most about Stephen Graham Jones's writing style, and I Was a Teenage Slasher in particular, besides the fact that he once again excelled at writing and creating atmosphere, just putting the reader right there, standing in the dust on the side of the road by the cotton fields, just seeing this unfold. He was just able to find the center of things, and it wasn't always what he said or how he said it. Sometimes it was in what he didn't say. Even though he didn't type the words out, what he did write made you feel it. You knew that exact feeling in that moment. You knew what was happening without being told, because we've all been there. I've got an example, and I do have to preface this by saying I'm reading from the uncorrected advanced reader's copy. That means when you get the book in its final publication, what I'm about to read may be taken out altogether. It may be changed. So just keep that in mind. It's not a spoiler. It won't give anything away about what's happening in the story. This is just a moment between Tolly and his mom. In this interaction, she was faking like she was gagging at something, and she accidentally went overboard and made herself throw up. She's standing outside her truck puking, and Tolly is inside of her truck, and he picks up the CB radio. "Are you good out there, Pukey McPukins? Come back," I said into the mic in one of my many fake voices, which brought her up to the window to be sure I wasn't really pushing the button on the side. I already had my thumb pulled away and obvious, was grinning wide. "Pukey McPukins," she said, stepping up and in. "Over out," I said, hanging the mic back up, and that little ride with her from the house to the hardware store that afternoon, I'm not going to say anything else about it, cool? It's 6 minutes of my life tops, but some memories you don't measure in minutes or miles, but by how much of yourself is still in that moment. And I'm sorry, I'm a little emotional because I know how the book ends. I finished it and it hits different. This is a book you're going to want to own. You won't be able to walk by it on your shelf without touching your finger to its spine, or even just picking it out to look at it and rub your hand across the cover. It's just packed with summer vibes, 80s nostalgia, friendship, humor, loyalty, self-discovery. You just can't go wrong picking this book. I'm sure it goes without saying, but I would absolutely recommend this book to anyone who loves horror, or anyone who just wants to pick up a good story to read during the Halloween season that is fast approaching. In fact, in my opinion, after July 4th passes, July 5th is the start of Halloween season. What am I saying? I'm lying. It's always Halloween in my little heart. That's gonna do it for me today, talking about I Was a Teenage Slasher by Stephen Graham Jones, out today. Guys, what are you doing? Get your hands on a copy, get in line for it at your library. You can't go wrong with this book. If you enjoyed today's review, let me know by hitting that like button. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll catch you in the next one.